The Indiana Fever walked into Minnesota with their season already hanging by a thread. 5 players completely sidelined, including Caitlin Clark, Sophie Cunningham, Khloe Bibby, Sydney Coulson, and Aari McDonald. And even Odyssey Sims could barely stand, but still forced herself onto the floor just to give them a chance. And as if the injury crisis wasn't brutal enough, the referees delivered the knockout blow when Lexie Hull took a vicious elbow straight to the face from Kayla McBride, only for the whistle to unbelievably go against Hull, leaving Caitlin Clark furious on the sidelines, the fans in total disbelief, and everyone asking the same question: how much more can this team survive when it feels like the officiating itself is stacked against them? Imagine stepping onto the court against one of the toughest teams in the league with more than half your roster gone, not a figure of speech, literally 5 core players out, Caitlin Clark sidelined for weeks with a groin injury, Sophie Cunningham gone for the season with an MCL tear, Khloe Bibby dealing with a knee issue, Sydney Coulson done with a torn ACL, and Aari McDonald lost with a foot fracture. That's an entire rotation erased. And yet, Odyssey Sims, who herself wasn't anywhere near healthy, dragged her body onto the hardwood because there was simply no one else left. And when you read that list out loud, it already feels exhausting. But for Indiana, it wasn't just words on paper, it was their reality, a nightmare lineup that forced them to fight uphill before the ball had even been tipped. This avalanche of injuries didn't just take away star power, it ripped apart the very structure of Indiana's rotations. Their guard and wing depth completely evaporated overnight, forcing players like Lexie Hull and Kelsey Mitchell into roles they had never been asked to carry. 2 nights earlier against Minnesota, Hull logged a career-high 37 minutes and poured in 23 points, not because it was some luxury showcase, but because there was literally no one else to fill that spot. Every possession turned into a mountain to climb, every substitution stretched thinner than paper, and while Hull proved she could rise to the challenge, the reality was brutal. The Fever weren't asking for highlights, they were demanding survival minutes from a roster running on fumes, and that pressure is the kind that breaks teams long before the scoreboard ever does. To even stay afloat, Indiana had to patch the roster together with hardship contracts, emergency signings thrown into the fire before they could even unpack their bags. Shea Petty was suddenly logging meaningful minutes. Odyssey Sims was expected to steady the team while battling her own injuries, and Aerial Powers was tossed straight into the rotation without chemistry or rhythm. 3 players asked to hold crucial roles with 0 time to adjust. No preseason, no practice, nothing, just survival. And that's the kind of chaos that destroys cohesion. Every possession became trial and error. Every defensive rotation exposed by opponents who knew they were facing a group still learning each other's names. And yet, somehow these replacements were expected to carry playoff weight in a league where every detail matters, a reality so brutal it forces teams to either collapse or create miracles on the spot. Even head coach Stephanie White admitted the physicality Indiana faced was on another level, and that was putting it lightly, because every drive to the rim felt like colliding with a brick wall. Every defensive stand drained the last ounce of energy from a roster already hanging by threads. Yet, in the middle of all that punishment, Kelsey Mitchell kept the Fever alive, dropping 26 points while being trapped, bumped, and doubled from start to finish, carrying stretches of offense on her back like a superstar refusing to quit. But even that Herculean effort had limits, because when your entire rhythm depends on hardship signings, learning plays on the fly, and exhausted starters logging unsustainable minutes, there's only so far one player can drag you. And Indiana knew it. They weren't losing for lack of heart. They were losing because the tank was empty before tip-off and the league just kept piling weight on top. But as if the injuries weren't already a death sentence, the referees decided to put the final nail in the coffin, because in the middle of a brutal game, Lexie Hull took a sharp elbow straight to the face from Kayla McBride. She went down clutching her jaw. The crowd gasped. Everyone expected an obvious foul on McBride, maybe even a flagrant. But instead, the whistle turned against Hull. The same player who absorbed the hit was somehow punished as if she caused it, and the arena exploded in disbelief while Caitlin Clark stood furious on the sidelines, demanding answers. This wasn't just a bad call, it was a gut punch that symbolized something bigger, A sense that Indiana isn't just fighting opponents, they're fighting the officials too. And every fan watching had to wonder if the deck was being deliberately stacked against the Fever's playoff hopes. Social media erupted instantly, fans calling it one of the worst officiating moments of the season. Clips of the elbow flying across timelines with captions asking how the league could justify this nonsense. And the frustration wasn't just about one play. It was about a pattern. Because time and time again, Indiana players take the hits, whether it's shoves, body blows, or elbows to the face, and yet the whistle always seems to go the other way. Stephanie White hinted at it carefully in her post-game comments, saying the game was called differently and anyone with eyes could see it. Fever drives swallowed up without fouls, while the other end drew whistles for contact that barely existed. Inconsistency breeding anger, and to the players, it felt like confirmation that officiating bias was no longer an accident, but another opponent they had to battle every single night. And yet, even with the deck stacked against them, the Fever refused to collapse. Kelsey Mitchell once again carried the scoring load with 26 points, answering every Minnesota run until her legs finally gave out. But the real surprise came from Shea Petty, a hardship signing who had barely stepped foot in Indiana before being thrown into major minutes. And instead of shrinking, she lit up the scoreboard with 16 points off the bench, as if she had been part of the system all year. Meanwhile, Aaliyah Boston anchored the paint through double teams and relentless body checks, pulling down boards and keeping Indiana alive on defense. Lexie Hull's 23-point effort from the previous game, still echoing as proof she was ready for the moment, and even Aerial Powers, another late addition, fought tooth and nail for every shot together, creating a patchwork lineup that somehow clawed and scraped to keep the Fever in games where, on paper, they had no business competing. That's why all eyes turned to Caitlin Clark, because even though she wasn't cleared to play yet, she showed up in Minnesota, warming up with her teammates, moving on the court again for the first time in weeks, and that single sight shifted the entire mood of the franchise. The fans buzzing, the players feeding off the hope that their leader might finally be close to a comeback, because without her, this team has looked like a patchwork survival unit. Kelsey Mitchell forced to play superhero, Boston battling alone inside, hardship signings thrown into impossible roles. But with Clark, everything changes. She's not just points on the board. She's the engine, the floor general, the one who makes everyone around her better. And now the Fever cling to the 8th seed by the thinnest margin with brutal games ahead, knowing their season, their playoff hopes, and maybe their entire future hinges on whether Caitlin Clark can get back in time to save them. The Fever aren't just battling opponents anymore, they're battling injuries that have ripped their roster apart and officiating that seems determined to push them even lower. And yet, game after game, they keep showing a level of resilience that most teams would have lost weeks ago. Kelsey Mitchell refusing to let go of the fight, Aaliyah Boston anchoring a defense under siege, Lexie Hull and Shea Petty stepping into roles no one thought they could handle. And through it all, the fan base holds its breath, waiting for Caitlin Clark to walk back onto the floor, because her return isn't just about getting a star back, it's about hope, it's about order in the chaos. It's about a season that still hangs in the balance, with every game carrying playoff weight. So the question is simple. Can one player change everything and drag this battered team into the postseason? Or will the combined weight of injuries and officiating bias crush the Fever's miracle run before it even begins? Let us know what you think down in the comments. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on all notifications so you never miss a moment of this drama.